the notion propagated by the Western feminists regarding saving the third world women is kind of problematic in the sense that it misrepresents the Taliban's in
No, no,
the in,
not to misrepresent the Taliban. Rather, it
misrepresents the notion of women being
women's
oppressed for
development and women's
religious
issue.
for
Most
religious stuff and
no, that is different. Thank you, Mashaik. It is something, the Western world, they conceptualize or their ideas, beliefs about the women of third world women, that is something misleading. Okay. The article mostly talked about that. Okay. Okay. Yes. Then, Mashaik, then. Yes. Then carry on, Mashaik.
এরপরে উনি আরো বলেছেন যে বিভিন্ন যে ক্যাম্পেইন গুলো হচ্ছে থার্ড ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়েমেনদের সেভিং এর জন্য সেগুলো আলটিমেটলি রিপাবলিকান থেকে শুরু করে কনজারভেটিভ লিবারেল বা যারা কিছু সবারই আলটিমেট একটা প্রফিট গেইনের একটা অংশ হিসেবে চলে যাচ্ছে
That is not all about the
যেখানে
profit gain. That is also that is something the consensus of all walks of life within Western world. Even think about within the urban middle class space within the Bangladeshi context, and even think about the urban space, secular modern space of India and other Western part. Think about যে হচ্ছে there is a common there are common concept consensus among the radical, non-radical, liberal, non-liberal, republic, democrat, feminist, non-feminist, একটা common consensus about Islam and Muslim women in particular. So when they talk about তোমার হচ্ছে gender question, even they are talking about the development of women. So whole তোমার হচ্ছে discourse surrounded to develop the women, to rescue women, and to improve the condition of women. And what actually they did, তারা যে কাজটা করেছে, it is something it is something equivalence of women's tyranny, women's plight, equivalent to Islamic fundamentalism, or it is something Islam. That is something misleading. The article mostly talked about it. Okay, really clear? Shall I clear? Pfizer
yes
clear?
sir
So think about within the Bangladeshi context, majority of us, আমাদের মধ্যে common tendency to assume the flight of the women, the deteriorated condition of the women, it is something equivalent to Islamic fundamentalism because of the so-called mullahs, munshis, the flight of women, women are being defied, women are being stereotyped, stigmatized, or something like this. So such kind of simplification of the plight of women within Muslim societies, that is something misleading, which actually Sama Mahmood as well as Charles Hashkin tried to explore in this article. Clear, Preeti Hawk? Pretty clear?
Yes,
Clear?
sir.
Okay. Faiza, clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the article mostly talked about তোমার হচ্ছে the campaign, তারপর হচ্ছে তোমার হচ্ছে procession programs within the Western world since 1919 about the plight of the women, specifically the Afghan women during the Taliban regime in 1999, and it is something before the তোমার হচ্ছে emergence of war and terror, so-called 9/11. You are aware what is 9/11? Faiza, what is 9/11?
Yes, sir.
What is 9/11?
Sir, that is a very controversial question. I mean, but in general, it is basically the attack on the World Trade Center in America that was said to be carried out by
Hmm.
the
Okay, so
Taliban.
this is the incident. So what actually the significance of the incidents? Following this incidents, the Western world, they declared the war on terror. Against what? They branded all sects of Islam as something opposed to the Western values and ethos, and they brand level the Islamic world as something, hey, war on terror, it is something war against Islam. But later in 2005, they escaped from their own position and they divided the Muslim societies in two parts. One is liberal Musliman or so-called good Muslim or so-called Bhadra Musliman, and another one is the bad Muslim. So which one is the good Muslim? Those Muslims, those who are not antagonistic towards Western aspirations, Western worldview, and Western world. And who are the bad Muslims? The bad Muslims are those who are not তোমার হচ্ছে it is something those who are not those who are antagonistic towards Western aspirations and not it is something they are not তোমার এই যে satisfied with Western liberal values or something like this, and they are always তোমার হচ্ছে struggling or fighting against Western aspirations. So what actually at that moment Western world হ্যাঁ they declared that they are not fighting against the good Muslims, rather they are fighting against the bad Muslims. And it was the policy of the Western world, any kind of phenomena in the name of the bad Muslim, that should be annihilated, that should be stigmatized, and that should be তোমার হচ্ছে এটাকে sideline. Clear what is war and terror? Clear? 9/11, Faiza, clear?
Yes, sir.
So think about the question of the women. It is, when we talk about the Muslim question, mostly we started our discussion following the 9/11. But important issue is that the question of the Taliban and the question of the women within Afghan society, it was not just following the 9/11, rather it started before, during 1999. And the Lanus personally gave a contribution of $1 lakh to help kick off a public awareness campaign. Movies Leno testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, spoke to Unocall. I don't know you are familiar with the Unocall, Chevron, and other kinds of তোমার হচ্ছে Western companies. They are actually তোমার হচ্ছে they are doing it is something the extraction of the mine, they usually extract the mine and other kinds of petroleum kind gas or other kinds of natural resources in most of the third world countries, and they propagated and campaigned with Unocall to suspend their project in Afghan societies. All these things actually they did to rescue the women of third world women. Clear Mashaik?
Yes, sir, clear.
So the feminist majority claims that it was their work that eventually decided Unocall officials to abandon their plans to develop a natural gas pipeline in Afghanistan. So through their own campaigns, the majority of the Western companies, they abandoned their project in Afghan societies. So through these kinds of campaigns, procession and protest, they tried to rescue the women. Clear? Okay? And to develop the condition of women within Afghan societies. And it was something they're understanding. Okay, and they also convinced the Hollywood-friendly Bill Clinton to condemn the Taliban regime. Clear? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then even skeptics who are normally leery of Western feminists' paternalistic desire to rescue third world women were sympathetic to the feminist majority's campaign. So all walks of life, feminists from all walks of life, it is not only the feminists or even the liberals, they're also sympathetic towards these kinds of campaign, and they argued that through kind of operation, through this kind of campaign, the women of third world countries would be rescued or saved. This was in part because the restrictions that the Taliban had imposed on women in Afghanistan seemed atrocious by any standard. So can you read it out, Fariha? They forbade women. Yes, please. Fariha?
Sure, sir.
Yes.
They forbid women from all positions of employment, eliminated schools for girls and university education for women in cities, outlawed women from leaving their homes unless accompanied by a close male relative, and forced women to wear the burqa.
Okay, so women were reportedly beaten, flogged for violating Taliban edicts. There seemed to be little doubt in the minds of many that the United States, with its impressive political and economic leverage in the region, could help alleviate this sad state of affairs. So US intervention within Afghanistan could alleviate the its condition of women. So clear.
Yes, sir.
So all these campaign এবং হচ্ছে মানে the fruit and the outcome of this campaign you are aware যে তাই না মানে হচ্ছে it manifested through the Western's aggression in Afghanistan following 9/11, and by the time the war started in 2001, feminists like Smeal could be found causally chatting with the generals about their shared enthusiasm for Operation Enduring Freedom. Operation Enduring Freedom, it was something, the aggression, the imperialist aggression of Western world in Afghanistan, and the possibility of women pilots commanding F-16s. So it was something. So it was not only the feminist, the Republican, from conservatives to liberals and radicals, from Republicans to Democrats, from Hollywood glitterate to grassroots activists, from all walks of life in Western societies, they accumulated under the common umbrella, and they propagated for common concern among they stranded under a common consensus that the third world women should be rescued, should be saved from the Taliban regime. And it was something interesting that the feminists, the generals, the military, from all walks of life, they came under the common umbrella to rescue the third world women. Clear? Mashaik, clear? Okay, so can you read it out from here? Among the key factors?
Among the key factors that facilitated this remarkable consensus, there are two in particular that we wish to explore here. The studied silence about the crucial role the United States had played in creating the miserable conditions under which Afghan women were living. And secondly,
Okay, thank you. So important one is then তোমার হচ্ছে the silence of তোমার so-called liberals, feminists, Democrats, conservatives, তোমার হচ্ছে Republicans about the condition of Afghan societies, which was something the direct outcome of Western imperialist foreign policies. So what kind of imperialist foreign policies they have implemented in Afghan societies, we will discuss it in later. Next one is a whole set of
and secondly, a whole set of questionable assumptions, anxieties, and prejudices embedded in the notion of
Islamic fundamentalism. So actually, both Saba and Charles Huskin, I don't know whether you are familiar with these two anthropologists. Charles Huskin, actually, he's a renowned anthropologist teaching at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and Saba Mahmood was her husband. Yeah, he was Saba Mahmood's husband, and Charles Huskin, he did an exemplary ethnography in Egypt on was Mahafil. It is something the tomar hoche cassette sermon. I especially encourage you to read his renowned ethnography on Egyptian society. The ethnographic name is the Ethical Soundscape. Important one, really important one. Please read it. And Saba Mahmood, you are familiar with her writings. You have already read myriad of articles of Saba Mahmood's in other courses of anthropology. So আমি আর এটা নিয়ে আলাপ করছি না. Saba Mahmood already died in 2018. Great loss for human for anthropology for all over the world. Okay, so Saba Mahmood, actually she was an architect, and when she noticed this kind of imperial aggression, reading Islam, something the way Western world read Islam, she saw it is something misleading. That is why she was even a progressive leader, campaigner, and then she decided that she will study something to intervene the question. Then she realized that in which discipline I can pursue my own academic queries or something like that. Then she started to read anthropology, and actually she realized that it is the anthropology, the actual discipline from where I can intervene the current political and a social and cultural question, what actually the world needs. So that is why চিন্তা করো she transformed from architecture to anthropology. এজন্য দেখবা her writings, it is something too catchy and too something, think about the architecture, I mean architecture like, তাই না, structural, মানে her argument, everything concrete. Okay. Okay, so the thing is that in this article, both Sabah and Charles, they try to explore two things: the miserable condition for which we are blaming the Taliban. Both of them, they are arguing that it is something, the simplification of the misery, a miserable condition, simplification of the তোমার হচ্ছে plight of the women, because the condition in which Afghan, not only the Afghan women but also the Afghan people, they are living, it is something disastrous, not because of the Taliban, because the way Western world implemented their imperialist project in Afghanistan following First World War and Second World War. And the last one, they tried to argue the way we are assuming about তোমার হচ্ছে Afghan question, and they also argued that our assumptions, our beliefs, anxieties, prejudice about the Muslim world, that is also something misleading. So in order to demonstrate that one, first of all, what they are actually, so can you read it? What actually they did? First of all, they highlighted the the scenario of the counter-insurgency and counter-insurgency in Afghan societies. Then they talked about the Islamic fundamentalism, the anxieties and assumptions of Western world about Islamic fundamentalism, and finally they talked about the notion of public religion. So can you read it out from here? First of all, Mashaik, it was striking how a number of...
Sir, from where?
It was striking.
It was striking how a number of commentators in discussions that preceded the war regularly failed to connect the predicament of women in Afghanistan with the massive military and economic support that the US provided as part of its Cold War strategy to the most extreme of Afghan religious militant groups. This silence, concomitant of the recharged
Okay,
enthusiasm.
forget about it. For example, as late as early December, the feminist majority website remained stubbornly focused on the ills of Taliban rule, with no mention এখান থেকে পড়ো,
with no mention of the 2.2 million victims of 3 years of drought who were put at greater risk of starvation because US bombing severely restricted the delivery of food aid.
Indeed.
Indeed, the feminist majority made no attempts to join the calls issued by a number of humanitarian organizations, including the Afghan Women's Mission, to halt the bombing so that food might have been transported to the Afghans before winter set in. In the crusade to liberate Afghan women from the tyranny of Taliban rule, there seemed to be no limit of the violence to which Americans were willing to subject the Afghans, women and men alike. Afghanistan, so it appeared, had to bear another devastating war so that, as the New York Times triumphantly noted at the exodus of the Taliban from Kabul, women can now wear burqas out of choice rather than compulsion.
So whole debate about the Afghan women, it was surrounded to emancipation of the women, to enhance the condition of women, rather the actual situation. Think about 2.2 million people, they were died because of the Western policies, and it was not only the drought, it is not this kind of natural calamities, it is something direct outcome of the Western imperialist project. Not only those kinds of projects, but also the way Western world armed the whole areas, and they have implemented their projects in the name of so-called Cold War. What actually they did, they armed the whole region with huge weapons and other kinds of things, and which was something devastating for a myriad of Afghan people. Okay. Okay, so our main concern এখান থেকে একটু পড়ো. Our main concern here is not...
Our main concern here is not simply to dwell on the inadequacies of the campaign to rescue Afghan women by the feminist majority or other groups, but to address the larger set of assumptions and attitudes undergirding this campaign and that are reflected widely in American public opinion. attitudes about the proper place of public religious morality in modern Islamic societies, and in particular, how such morality is seen to shape and constrain women's behavior.
So think about the whole assumptions of Western world. It is something যে you need to restrict the religion within the private sphere, তাই না? যে if you restrict the religion within the public sphere, sorry, within the private sphere, and you can easily rescue the women, and you can actually build a secular and plural society. It was something their own campaign, and হচ্ছে through this kind of campaigns and through this kind of narratives, they are mostly obscured the actual flight, the actual তোমার হচ্ছে disaster condition of Afghan world. Clear? So first of all, Charles and Sabah, what actually they did, তারা হচ্ছে they provided a landscape of counterinsurgency. You know, তোমার হচ্ছে during 1979, the Soviet Union, what actually they did, তারা হচ্ছে they occupied the Afghan land to safeguard the communist leaders and to safeguard the communist bloc within তোমার হচ্ছে Afghan frontier, and to rescue the Afghan people from so-called communist savages. At that moment, what actually American societies and CIA they did, they provided huge arms weapons to the Taliban, তোমার হচ্ছে to prevent and to resist the Soviet Union. And what actually they argued at that moment, they argued the fanatics fight better. So when people talked about why you are providing huge amount of weapons to the তোমার হচ্ছে Taliban, they argued that the fanatics fight better, and it is something, if fanatics will fight better, they can easily তোমার হচ্ছে resist the so-called communist world. So actually, at that moment, the way Western world implemented their so-called imperialist project within Afghan world, it was something structurally different. The way they have implemented their project in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua and other Latin American societies, what actually they did, the CIA and American world, they directly trained the militia, they directly trained the warriors. But in Afghanistan case, what actually they did, they didn't train them directly, rather they handed over huge amount of money to the Pakistani militaries, Pakistani intelligentsias, and they asked them to train the Taliban to fight against the Soviet Union. Clear? Clear, Shobai? Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what actually happened? So throughout the Afghan war, critics of the CIS covert operation. So it was not the CIS overt operation, rather it was the covert operation. Operation. Same thing in Bangladeshi context. I don't know, different kind of narratives in Bangladeshi context. Think about in 1971, myriad of Tibetan people they fought for Bangladesh. Do you know? তোমরা জানো অনেক বাংলাদেশ during the 1971 war, many Tibetans, many তোমার হচ্ছে people, they fought in Bangladeshi তোমার হচ্ছে field. জানো তোমরা মুক্তিযুদ্ধের সময়? জানো?
No, sir, I didn't know that.
Oh my God. Oh my God. You know, many Bangladeshi freedom fighters, they went to India তোমার হচ্ছে to তোমার হচ্ছে fought against the Pakistani soldiers. But at that moment, Indira Gandhi, even the Indian society, they were worried about the so-called communists. You know, at that moment, the trump of the Naxalites in West Bengal, তোমার হচ্ছে Indira Gandhi, Indian society, even the American societies, they are worried about that what actually happened in East Pakistan, that means in current Bangladesh, and they are worried that following the war of independence, if the communists would তোমার হচ্ছে take over the power, what will happen here? So এখানে কিন্তু একটা যুদ্ধের মধ্যে war within war, একটা cover war হয়েছে, and at that moment that is different. I'm not going into detail to talk about this. Another interesting thing, at that moment, myriad of তোমার হচ্ছে Indian insurgent, they walk, it's a myriad of Fijo, Naga, Mizo, Assamese, they fought against the India, and majority of them, they escaped in Chittagong hill tracks, because all of them, they look same, তাই না? They looks like they are the Mongoloid. And interestingly, at that moment, myriad of Tibetan people, they escaped Tibet because of China's invasion in Tibet, and they escaped in India. So what actually India they did, তোমার হচ্ছে they persuaded those Tibetan people to fight in Chittagong hill tracts. So if those people will enter in the Chittagong hill tracts, the Chittagonian people, they hill tracts people, they would not recognize them as something Indian or something. Hey? So at that moment, what actually happened? These Tibetan people, they came here, they massacred the Naga, Fizo. That is different thing. I'm not going into detail. Read it from different myriad of তোমার articles, movies, even তোমার হচ্ছে books available. If you have interest, you can go it. However, interestingly, the CIA's operation in Afghanistan, what actually happened at that moment, it was not the তোমার হচ্ছে overt operation, it was the covert operation. Similarly, যে CIA যখন হচ্ছে at that moment India তারা যেরকম একটা covert operation করেছে, it is something covert war, that is different. That is I'm just talking about the covert war. So it was something that covert war through the তোমার হচ্ছে financing the তোমার হচ্ছে Taliban, financing the Pakistani military, they তোমার হচ্ছে implemented the covert operation. So critique of the CIA's covert operation voiced two major complaint. দুটো complaint ছিল. First, Faria, can you read it out? First, the bulk of...
Sure, sir. First, that the bulk of US aid was being funneled to the most extreme and conservative Islamic groups from the Afghan opposition. Second, that as indirect consequence of the CIA operation, the Afghanistan-Pakistan region was now the largest producer of heroin as well as the sizable marketplace. For limiting
so when people talked about the CIA's covert operation, they were mostly talked about the CIA funneled huge amount of তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে aid তোমার হচ্ছে towards Islamic groups, and another one হচ্ছে the indirect consequence of the CIA's operation that the whole region flooded with the heroin. For consequence, এখানে দেখা গেছে যে হচ্ছে mostly even the Pakistani society mostly flooded with the heroin. Think about the Bangladesh society. In the name of so-called China's economic development policies and programs, they are mostly silent about the Myanmar so-called brutal policy of the Yaba drug dealing in Bangladeshi context. Think about how Yaba mostly flooded the whole country of the Bangladesh. মানে তুমি হচ্ছে আমার তো 4 of my friends, close friends are police officer, and many of them, they told me that যে তাদের কাছে many parents তোমার হচ্ছে তাদের কাছে এসে কান্না করে যে প্লিজ help us to save our son daughters from so-called Yava. এটা কি পরিমাণ যে ferocious, মানে disastrous situation in the Bangladeshi urban space, you are not aware. I don't know যে তোমরা whether you are aware of it or not. However, so same thing, the event তোমার হচ্ছে in the during this kind of Western operation in Afghan societies, the whole Afghan তোমার whole region mostly flooded with the heroin. At that moment, so in the name of so-called war between the তোমার হচ্ছে communist as well as the Islamist, the moderate, the secular, the liberal voices of Afghanistan mostly marginalized within the Afghan societies. Think about what actually going on in Bangladeshi societies. You are thinking that the whole debates in Bangladeshi societies, it is something between so-called Chatonabadi or progressive alliances to save the Murti or Bhaskorjo, and another forces of so-called mullahs to তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে ব্রেক ডাউন দা এটার নাম কি মূর্তিজ ইন বাংলাদেশি কনটেক্সট. থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট দ্য মডারেট, দ্য লিবারেল ভয়েসেস অফ বাংলাদেশ মোস্টলি মার্জিনালাইজড ইন দ্য বাংলাদেশি কনটেক্সট. দেখতেছো না তোমরা? ইউ আর মানে think about the Bangladeshi context. Similarly, in the name of saving the Bangladeshis from so-called Islamists and mullahs, what actually going on here? Think about the people's right to vote, democracy, proper participation, liberal voice, mostly marginalized হয়ে গেছে না বাংলাদেশে in the name of so-called Shahbagi and so-called Hefazuti movement. Or where are the liberal voice? Where are the lay peoples? They are mostly marginalized within the Bangladeshi debates. দেখতেছো না তোমরা? দেখতেছো?
Yes, sir.
Same thing. What? So the people's মানে দেখো মানে history, how history defeats. So think about AJ, what actually happened in the name of counterinsurgency. The whole area mostly flooded with arms and weapons. Okay, okay. Have you read the article? সবাই পড়েছো? Have you read the article? Mashaik? Okay, so the thing is that তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে so when the counterinsurgency started to implement in Afghan societies, you know, the liberal, the তোমার হচ্ছে the majority voices mostly marginalized and outcasted. Yeah. And what actually happened? তোমার হচ্ছে the whole area mostly flooded with the arms, and then তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে can you read it out from here? Mashaik, can you read it out from here?
From which part, sir?
Mavis Leno said 2 years
Mavis
ago.
Leno said 2 years ago, women in Afghanistan could work, be educated, and move
Okay,
about.
just simple. Sorry, Mashaik. In 1995, Taliban, for the first time, they took over the power in Afghan societies, and you know, following their tomar হচ্ছে এই যে occupying the state power, media of the feminists, they started to campaign against them, and they argued that 2 years ago. Yes, please carry on.
Yes. 2 years ago, women in Afghanistan could work, be educated, and move about freely. Then the Taliban seized power. Today, women are prohibited from leaving their homes unless accompanied by a close male relative and are forced to wear the burqa. Girls and women are banned from schooling, no healthcare, no education, no freedom of movement. This nightmare is reality for 11.5 million women and girls in Afghanistan.
Yes.
It has been common knowledge for anyone interested in the region that Afghan men and women have long suffered from many of the ills that the feminist majority attributed to the Taliban.
Okay, thank you. So important one. So these women, Mavis Leno, who provided $1,000 to campaign against the Taliban to rescue the women, they argued that to rescue women, what are the problems? The problem is that no healthcare, no education, তোমার হচ্ছে no access to তোমার হচ্ছে job or something like this. So we need to rescue the women. So it has been common knowledge for anyone interested in the region. Afghan women and men have long suffered. So the kind of suffering, the kind of flight of the Afghan people and women, men and women. So the Western world, they assume it is something only because of the Taliban. The majority of even the feminist majority, they attributed this kind of suffering to the Taliban. Clear? So for example, yes, please. For example.
Uh, where is it? I lost.
For example, here.
For example, in addition to being one of the poorest nations of the world, Afghanistan had for a number of years one of the highest infant and maternal mortality rates. These conditions were only exacerbated by 20 years of war, during which the delicate balance of tribal power was radically destabilized by the influx of weapons, making ordinary people subject to violence on an unprecedented scale. As is often the case, the increased militarization of Afghan society made women more subject to violence than at any time before.
So it was not only the Taliban. Think about what actually happened. So the whole Western world, they started to fight তোমার হচ্ছে in Afghan landscape. It is not only the US but also the Soviet Union. Both of these world power, when they started to fight in Afghan land, what actually happened? Mostly তারা হচ্ছে they flooded the whole land with arms এবং হচ্ছে they started to hinder the তোমার হচ্ছে food transportation and other kinds of health facilities. So because of these তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে war, because of these তোমার হচ্ছে imperialist project, the Afghan people, they were mostly deprived of the food, healthcare, and majority of them were the direct victim of this kind of war. And you know, near about how many people? Near about, I read it from a part that near about 2 million Afghan died at that moment. More than 6 million, they escaped and they became the refugee, and 75% of them are the women. Here, I read it. Yes, please carry on. Carry on, please.
From which part, sir?
As is okay, so
As
during
it-
this period,
During this period of civil war, perhaps 2 million Afghans were killed and 6 million made refugees, 75% whom are women and children. Afghanistan today remains one of the most heavily land-mined countries in the world.
thank you,
If
just
we
এখানে একটু থামাচ্ছি, thank you. Do you know what is land mining? I encourage you to visit Cox's Bazar. Whole Cox's Bazar তোমার হচ্ছে border and Bandarban border mostly flooded with mine by the Myanmar এই যে Myanmar border forces. So what actually they are doing তোমার হচ্ছে to restrict the Rohingyas movement, they flooded the whole border with mine. And anyone, what I have noticed from my field work in last October, what I have noticed, I talked to 3 victims of তোমার হচ্ছে land mining. They went to the border areas তোমার হচ্ছে to look after their মানে হচ্ছে এই যে animals such as cows, হ্যাঁ, house মানে এই যে livestock animals. So when they entered in the তোমার হচ্ছে border areas with their cows or goats, suddenly মানে 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 they lost their leg, someone already died, মানে বুঝতেছো কি জিনিস? So you know, this is only the তোমার হচ্ছে border areas, conflict border areas between তোমার হচ্ছে Myanmar or Bangladesh. It is also an important route of elephant migration, you know, myriad of elements in whole regions from Bangladesh to Myanmar to Thailand, hey. Elephant mostly they are not তোমার হচ্ছে they do not stay within a certain place for a certain period of time, rather they always move from one place to another. It is noted that more than 26 elephant died in Bangladesh Myanmar border in last তোমার হচ্ছে 5 to 10 years. It is only because the so called তোমার হচ্ছে mining. So same thing in Afghan societies through the মানে I don't know যে তোমরা এই জিনিসগুলো জানো কিনা in the Bangladeshi context. It's still Bangladesh near about 70 elephants they are মানে হচ্ছে restricted because whole Bangladesh Myanmar border mostly fancified, তাই না, তোমার হচ্ছে the Myanmar border security forces. That is different issue. However, so the important issue is that the whole Afghan society mostly flooded with weapons, তারপর হচ্ছে এই যে and people being maimed and killed on a daily basis. So you're just moving from one place to another and you're just losing your life because you know where mine just mostly তোমার হচ্ছে এই যে এটা কথা you are not aware where is the mine. So mine countries, so Afghanistan today remains one of the most heavily landed mine countries in the world. Do you know what is mine? জানো তো? Faiza, what is mine? Do you know? Faiza?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what is mine?
Mining as in,
So it is one kind of arms. Mostly তোমার
yeah.
হচ্ছে people placed it under the তোমার হচ্ছে under the land. So if someone move, so think about it, তুমি হাঁটছো হুট করে মানে যেখানে মানে certain amount of weight যে এটা সেখানে দেওয়া থাকে, যদি কেউ যদি 10 কেজির বেশি হয়ে যায়, হ্যাঁ, it will be মানে হচ্ছে bust. So মানে মানুষের ওজন তো 10 কেজি না, more than 10 kgs. It is not about the man, a human being. It could be animal or other kind of species যারা 10 কেজির বেশি. So when they move মানে এই যে যেহেতু এটা under the তোমার হচ্ছে ground, sorry under the land, so এটা যেহেতু মাটির নিচে লুকায় রাখা হয়, so if someone would like to move, the bust হয়ে সঙ্গে সঙ্গে কেউ পা হারায়, someone lose তোমার হচ্ছে leg or মানে তার সারা জীবনটাই হারায় ফেলে। বুঝছো জিনিস?